Use these. Steph, would you like me to share the presentation on our screen now or wait until?
Wait until he's announced your item. Thank you. Wait until the mayor has.
More comments on that.
Just joining the Zoom here. We'll get the other room joining us.
Yeah, I just wanted to set that up.
Nothing from Councillor Jurgensen or.
Councillor Saunders is on the airplane.
He's flying some?
Backing that up, because that,
Mike's.
Thanks.
Okay, what I do?
I understand there's a Q&A that follows this, and I understand.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'd like to call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order and begin by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, whose peoples have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Naklelahwem, Bowen Island.
There was nothing on that list when I just checked.
Okay.
Nothing in Zoom.
Okay, great. So we will consider this meeting open. I will draw everyone's attention to the agenda for those that are following along either in person here today or online or later in postator. The agenda and the full council package for this afternoon's meeting can be found at bowenislandmunicipality.ca, including all of the staff reports. I will look to our Deputy Corporate Officer for the introduction of any late items here today.
We have one on-table item, letter from Chris Arnold Forster.
Okay, with that, I will look for a motion to approve the agenda and on-table items for the June 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wick. We'll go tennis across the table here. Any discussion, changes, amendments? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Moving on to public comments. No public comments today?
No public comments.
Okay, and on to section 4 delegations. We have 4.1 Beverly Pittman, United Way of BC regarding transportation and the Healthy Aging Program. Welcome, thank you for joining us here today, and I will hand it over to you folks for your delegation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Bev Pittman. I am with United Way BC, and I hold the. Yes.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's Bev Pittman. I'm with United Way BC. I hold the position of Healthy Aging Manager for the Vancouver Coastal Region. I'm here today in conjunction with Kathy Pecora, who you will probably know is the chair of SKY, Seniors Keeping Young, and also with Christina Kelly sitting beside me, Strategic Initiatives Officer for the municipality. The connection has to do with transportation, seniors, transportation in particular, and it comes together with knowledge about through conversation of TransLink's offer to Bowen Island of a community shuttle bus. And so that is what prompted the presentation I gave this morning. You're going to hear an abbreviated version of what I gave to the SKY folks this morning. So I'll jump right into it. I'm going to keep the slide that we have just for a minute to say a bit more about me. I've been at United Way since 2008, working all the time on seniors transportation. It's a huge challenge. I have a PhD in urban and regional planning, and I've been working since the beginning on developing a sector across BC. United Way BC is now province-wide to support older adults living in community. Transportation is a huge piece of this after they lose their driver's license. So on the next slide, I also would like to acknowledge that we're gathering here on the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. United Way partners with 12 First Nations across BC to deliver Better at Home and other programs. The next slide is sort of fun. I thought it would appeal to people in the room. I'm a baby boomer. I'm right in the middle of the pack, and I could have been one of those kids in the back seat. So this was the vision. This kind of advertisement was really popular in the 1950s. It's what the Canada came out of the Second World War desiring: freedom to move into wide open spaces. And this is part of the automobile industry's rise to power. This, however, is what we wound up with, not here on Bowen Island, but in many places, and the transportation planners started responding to this situation. You can see the bus stuck in the middle. It was always automobile planning. The roads, 90% in the United States went towards building roads and bridges, et cetera, for the automobile. The lowly public transit was relegated to that kind of position, and definitely second place in terms of funding. So that was the norm for a very long time. And now the transportation planners are looking for new visions. I'm not going to show you this, but I understand it will go forward to you in the slide deck. This is a 3-minute video. Deloitte is one of the world's largest transportation planners, and this is about Ben's journey. Ben is a young man. He's very, very high tech. You see in this video him just walking on and off to a whole sequence of modes of transportation that are interconnected. So it's another dream around which the planners are getting organized. On the next slide, there is the next slide. I draw your attention to a new book. It is published, researched in this area just south of the border in Washington State. Anna Zivarts is a person with low vision. She tried to learn how to drive but could not. And so she documents in this book the 250 other people she speaks with who either cannot drive, cannot afford to drive, or prefer not to drive, possibly in the interests of working on the climate emergency. What she finds is that no less than 25% of Americans of all ages now do not drive, cannot drive, prefer not to drive. And in Canada, Pan-Canadian Research Group that's been working for 5 years has a comparable number of between 20 and 40%. Their claim is that somebody in the household of 20 to 40% of Canadians cannot afford to drive. So contrary to transportation planners or the often heard remark that everybody drives, it's not the case, and it's not the case in Canada. Next slide. So transportation, once you sort of dip into it, is more than about getting from point A to point B. It's definitely a means of social connection and inclusion for seniors and others. It puts the lie to a focus exclusively on social isolation and isolation without transportation. You need transportation to be included and a belonging member of community. It is a means of accessing goods and services, public and otherwise. It's a major challenge for older adults. It's the number one. Number two, it vies back and forth in the Lower Mainland between affordable housing and affordable public transit for seniors. But here in Bowen, you have a very common situation across BC. It's small town and rural remote communities where the seniors are feeling the pinch the most. 1 in 5 in a survey said that they would have to move communities once they hang up the keys, once they stop driving. Transportation this is huge for us now. Our funding at United Way comes from the Ministry of Health, all of it for healthy aging. Transportation is a key determinant of health, and so it's part of those social determinants of health that make up over half 55%, it's estimated, of our health and well-being. It's not our genetics. It's not the formal health services. It is rather the conditions of living, the socially created conditions of living, including access to public transit or not. It's not distributed equally. Access to transportation is an equity issue. It's receiving increased attention and funding as funders realize, especially in the area of health, that it's a necessary piece of supporting older adults to age in place at home. And it's an opportunity to act on climate. So here's a bit about us and how I, as a planner at United Way Healthy Aging, got into this game. Overall, we support older adults to age in place successfully. We want them active, connected, and engaged because they're healthy and they're contributing members of society. They have a lot to give. They're often the largest number of volunteers. Our vision is older British Columbians live and thrive in the communities they call. Nobody wants to live in a long-term care facility. About 3% of Canadians. So these now are, it's quite faint, all of the grants that we currently support through Ministry of Health funding. And right at the top is Aging in Motion, the Transportation Supports and Innovations Grant. That looks like $2 million a year, Ministry of Health funding, that is distributed to 38 nonprofit organizations across BC. Better at Home is our flagship. It's the non-medical home support program that started all these things off in 2012. Family and friend caregiver supports, hugely important to older adults who are caregivers, often for an older spouse. Social meals. So these are the determinants of health in part. Social prescribing is a new grant. It attempts to draw these services together and more besides already existing in community and with various health authorities. Therapeutic Activation Program is a fancy name for an ADP or an adult day program. We could call it a junior one or the step before an ADP. And there is volunteer coordination and supports. In the field of transportation, we have some of those grants supporting, for example, Vancouver Cycling Without Age, which is a trishaw powered by an e-bike and a volunteer rider. So the next one. This now a bit more into the transportation grant. I don't think I'll read through this. We want to increase transportation options for seniors. We want to both strengthen existing and encourage new ones into existence. We want to focus on the transportation deserts often found in rural, remote areas, including rural areas like Bowen, and have them identify local underutilized vehicles to build on. So the next is one of 4 examples of where our funding is going. This is up the coast, the Sunshine Coast. Pender Harbor Health Center is the holder of a $50,000 grant, and they've introduced a new 8-seater van. They're also in line for a federal. I wanted to tell you about the funding opportunities. There's quite a lot of them. The Federal Rural Transit Grant is looking favorably for them, apparently, but they were deemed a transportation desert, and now those that minibus, soon to be a regular size bus, knock on wood, runs up and down the coast there. That's Egmont in the north and Sechelt just off the side of the page. I'm going to have to go quickly here. Next is way up north. This is a paratransit service in Dawson Creek. I'm going to take you to the next one. In the Gulf Islands on Hornby and Denman, there is a grant where the coordinator, our funding goes towards the coordinator, assesses what local seniors, there's only so many of them, need and lines them up with the respective or the appropriate transportation services that are available. On the northern Gulf Islands, this time on Cortez, they're partnering with the First Nations. The First Nations head the bus, the nonprofit and the health association there are taking seniors from the reserve as well as the Cortez into Campbell River for medical appointments. They're banking. There is a banking of medical appointments, so the seniors come in and they can go 1, 2, 3 into the doctor's office and then head home. The next one is very quickly a report we did at United Way with a PhD student, and it's promising models for community-based seniors transportation. And the next is, let's pass on this. The Go Bus was a model that stopped during COVID, unfortunately. But this was a flexible, fixed route senior shuttle bus that was in North Vancouver, serving the Lonsdale neighborhoods either side. It was hugely successful. It went to the drugstores and the grocery stores and to the seniors' community centers, and it enabled seniors to get out and connect and get the groceries, etc. It's no longer happening. COVID happened, essentially. It was almost taken up by TransLink, but the social worker / friend, kind of a fellow who was the driver, TransLink said, could not be duplicated within the ranks of the unionized drivers. And so that's why that model didn't fly. And now we're on to a municipal seniors bus service. There's 4 in Delta. Delta has 22% compared to 17%. Here on Bowen, it's 25%. 65 plus in the population. And it's been running very successfully. It's a free bus. And there are 2 others. Richmond has free service out of the recreation center, and another one still is not coming right now. So onward. The Zunga bus was a pilot that ended last year. It was a small and flexibly routed, on-demand bus that the community apparently was crazy about it. They came up with the logo. Zunga is the name of that swing out over to the water or the lakes in the region. That's where the name came from. And it was too expensive for the municipality to hold its own. It failed to get BC Transit support, and so it's gone now, really, unfortunately. And the next slide is key learnings. I think this is, I'm going to leave this for your reading, but it goes, and I want to mention GERTI. GERTI stands for Gabriola Environmentally Responsible Trans-Island Express. It was started, as the name suggests, in response to environmental degradation. It has just been electrified. The next slide shows the electrified bus, and it has just received funding from the Regional District of Nanaimo of $273,000 a year for 5 years. This bus does not serve just seniors, but the population on this island has really high proportion. So the next slide still is something to read. But it points me to something I want to say, and that is that your municipal strategic initiatives officer has already started working to revive the age-friendly community planning that your municipality has done in the past. This is the World Health Organization's age-friendly community transportation checklist. Just a handy thing to go through and see how you miss or might meet these different criteria. I think that's it. I have in the next slide and the one following, you'll be able to, when you get your package, see a 50-minute long video about transportation challenges seniors experience and solutions that have been put forward. It's a real survey of the field of seniors transportation. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. And I'll look to council for questions or comments. Councillor Wake, followed by Councillor Fast.
Thank you. You're referring to us getting this presentation, but how are we going to get it?
Oh,
In the revised
maybe
agenda
that's me.
package.
I told her that it would be included, the link in our minutes.
Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm interested in the local BC examples. That's fantastic. Thank you. I was familiar with some of them. Some of them I'm sorry to hear about the Zunga bus and that kind of thing. Denman and Hornby, can you say that again? I wonder if that's our fellow trustee, Sam Borthwick, I think that might be him, who's the coordinator there. How does that work? If you know.
Yeah, well, how does it work? Our funding goes to a nonprofit there. I think it's health. It said on the slide, it's the health center. And the funding goes for a coordinator who does that work of, it's an add-on to the existing service. It's, just really matches the senior and his or her needs with the available transportation. Often there's a companion who goes along. So if you think of a medical trip onto the mainland, or at least the island, Vancouver Island, and then back again, that kind of thing is happening too.
Perfect. Thank you. I knew there was a bus, but I wasn't sure if you were meaning that there was another one. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity on the Southern Gulf Islands. You probably know that this part of Canada has 7 out of 10 of Canada's oldest communities. So this is Parksville. Qualicum Beach is at the top of the list, 56.3. Remember, Bowen is 25%. Sydney is up there. Parksville is in the 40s, high 40s. All of the Southern Gulf Islands, Maine is just below 50%. Nanaimo is high. Osoyoos is high. Osoyoos is 46.2%. Across on the Sunshine Coast, it's 33%. So you're right in this area where people love to come to retire. The result is that when they stop driving, they're going to be needing alternatives, or else we're going to be sorry they're not getting around. They'll be stuck at home.
I'm curious, go ahead, Councillor Giddy.
I'm really glad that you've given this presentation and come to Bowen and shared a lot of your wisdom. And I'm glad that you're sitting at the table with our staff member who's been working really well and hard on our local transportation and getting the new bus from transit. So thank you very much. And I look forward to getting more information in terms of this too brief an outline, but.
Well, I look forward to working some more because this is the plan with both Kathy and Christina. This is my job.
Councillor Morris.
There was an excellent presentation to Sky this morning and really good discussion in the question and answer period.
Great. I'm curious, yeah, the slide I was curious about that intersects with the municipal governance piece was the lessons learned slide, which passed pretty quick. And curious just in terms of the breadth of the projects that we went through here from the I think it was Zunga and Powell River to Gertie in Gabriola. What are some of the top level considerations that could be applied to Bowen as we start to look at options like these that the municipality should be considering? You know, one from the perspective of being within the TransLink catchment versus BC Transit, as well as our own sort of unique population and location in the province.
There you go. Oh no, I was heading for another one. There it is. Yeah. It's really important that the driver you choose, it's not a union person. It is somebody who's part social worker. That's really important. Another thing to know is that there is funding available. The federal government in particular is aware the population is aging. They work with the concept of aging in place. Likewise, transportation as a determinant of health. They know those things. And so the old bridge building, highway building organizations are funding projects like mobility justice. So there's a shift happening. There's also a real desire to electrify, and we're seeing that on Gabriola. Also in the Columbia Basin Trust, they are electrifying local transit vehicles. Other things to keep in mind is if you have a service, get it up and going. It has to be regular, and it can't just be one day a week. It has to have some frequency, visibility, and above all, reliability. You have to go out there and do a reliable job because people won't stand and miss the thing. Partnering, the retirement companies, they're in this. Amica is involved. The municipalities are stepping up, the small ones. BC Transit can be a partner. The Northern Development Initiative Trust has worked with, do you remember the Highway of Tears? Lots of communities along Highway 16 West, and they have quite an intricate locally nonprofit or operated system of short hauls that get seniors to groceries and out for visits in that area. So partnerships, building community support and buy-in, involving seniors. Here on Bowen, United Way has funded a small satellite Better at Home. The Better at Home regularly does have a seniors advisory committee. That could be the beginning of emphasizing seniors transportation. And then I could be working with the woman, Kim Sinclair, who's here, to angle for grants outside of our own and just to beef up. That's a potential point of departure. And there was interest this morning in Sky about working along those lines. But back to find suitable drivers, definitely. Covering costs to maintain and purchase vehicles, yeah. Sourcing funding, especially for services that are grant funded, yeah. Traditionally, it's been cobbling all kinds of grants together. We're really benefiting from the federal government's turn to the rural transit. It's a big grant, and they seem to be handing out quite a lot. It definitely requires the advocacy on the part of the politicians to help you. I've seen that. Yeah, those are the main ones.
Okay. Yeah, that's encouraging. I just had a conversation with our MP about a week and a half ago, and he was asking whether we were looking to make an application to that transit fund. So
That's great.
Yeah, it's certainly a doorway we'll keep open.
Something I can say I've observed and been told every time I turned around, lots of people wanted me to know this fact about Bowen is the hilliness and also the steep driveways in and out of people's homes and how that sort of defies a lot of the current transportation options for seniors. So overcoming that is something that whatever you bring onto the island needs to be able to do. But that's where you bring in the bus buddies and they help with that first leg of the trip. You've often heard, I'm sure, that the first and last legs are the most difficult.
Okay. Not seeing any further questions or comments. Thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, thank you.
Next on our agenda, moving on to item 4.2, we have Sarah Zielman and Warren Hansen from the Sunshine Coast Community Forest regarding community forest model to expand stewardship over provincial public land blocks.
Thank you.
Just on screen here. We can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for being here today.
Okay, wonderful. I'm Sarah Zielman. I'm the Executive Director for the Sunshine Coast Community Forest.
And I'm Warren Hansen. I'm the Managing Forester for the Community Forest.
So we have a bit of a slide deck prepared here. I'll talk a little bit about the organization and governance, and then Warren will talk a little bit about forestry, ecosystem-based management. We'll try to be succinct. We do have a lot of information. So I'll start at the beginning. What is a community forest? And this actually means different things in different countries around the world. In BC, a community forest is a type of forest tenure that can only be held by a municipal government or First Nation or partnership between the two, or in some cases, a nonprofit society where it has support from local governments. In our case, we're owned by the District of Sechelt. So we're going to talk particularly about our community forest, but we'll try to weave in where, there are community forests that are organized differently in terms of organizational structure, in terms of how they do forestry. At the root, there is a program with program goals defined by the Ministry of Forest, and it's about local people making local decisions about the forests around them for local benefit. So at a higher level land use planning, First Nations and provincial governments make decisions about where will be a park, where will be forest that's managed for timber harvesting. And where forest managed for timber harvesting is near communities, communities have the opportunity to apply for a community forest agreement, and that gives them the right to manage it in alignment with their own community values and objectives. The organizational structures have embedded accountability and transparency measures. We are subject to the Freedom of Information Act being owned by the District of Sechelt. That's not the case with all structures, but most community forests do have a high level of accountability to the community embedded either within their organizational structures in different ways, or even within their community forest agreement with the province, where it's a requirement of holding and keeping that tenure that they hold a certain number of public meetings. Those meetings must have public question and answer periods. They sometimes have to most publish their financial statements. Ours are audited to the same standard as a municipal government. So we go through a very, very rigorous audit, and our financial statements are published online as soon as they're available. We are a nonprofit organization. We are also a qualified donee, which is a type of charitable status, quasi-charitable status, and we're the first community forest in BC to be recognized as a qualified donee, which just happened in the last year. And then one of the most important pieces of a community forest that's different from other forest tenures is that we are area-based. So we have a particular boundary within which we have exclusive timber harvesting rights, and that fosters a longer-term stewardship and investment in silviculture than other types of forest tenures. So when we replant a forest, we know or expect that people in our community will be the beneficiaries of whatever condition we leave it in. And so that encourages greater investment in the landscape and in how it's managed. We recently did a comprehensive strategic plan update that led to new mission and vision. This was a process that was a collaboration between our board of directors and our community advisory panel. Our mission is that through transparent, community-rooted stewardship of our forests, we create enduring environmental, social, and economic benefits that enrich the lives of Sunshine Coast residents and future generations. Our vision is that the Sunshine Coast Community Forest is known for innovative ecological stewardship that strengthens forest health, sustains economic opportunity, supports local well-being, and fosters deep community connection to the land. We are led by a volunteer board of directors. We have a board of 9. They are appointed by our municipal government, mayor and council of the District of Sechelt. At the time our community forest was formed, partnership was offered to the Sechelt Nation and other local governments, and they declined to join at that point in time. It was about 20 years ago. We do still work very closely with the Sechelt Nation. Our community forest is wholly within the SWIA of the Sechelt Nation, and we work under their Rights and Title Department to adhere to their own land use planning, whether it is a requirement at a provincial level or not. We look to make sure that we're not planning things that are undermining their own vision and stewardship initiatives, whether they're legal obligations at this point or aspirational. Our board sets policy and provides oversight, so they operate at a fairly high level. We also are very actively engaging with the community. So beyond these people on our board of directors, we're working with the community. And one of the important aspects of that community advisory panel is it doesn't have the fiduciary responsibility to the organization that the board of directors does. And that changes their focus a little bit. They're not talking about insurance. They're not reviewing employment contracts or considering legal matters. They're very focused on forestry. We also attend many community events and hold field trips, meet with different community groups to get a really broad sense of what people's expectations are, what needs are being met by the forest. And in that way, we can really try to integrate all of those uses in how we plan forestry. So on our board right now, we have a retired biologist. We have someone doing or actually, I think he's now completed his master's in environmental sciences. We have a whole breadth of experience. And one area where I think our communities are quite aligned, Bowen Island and the Sunshine Coast, relative to the many rural communities that have community forests in BC. We do have communities that are very connected to our urban areas, a lot of travel and tourism between Vancouver, a lot of retirees from those urban centers. And so when you envision what would your board of directors look like, our community advisory panel has a retired UBC forestry professor on it. And I'm sure you all know people in your community that if you were asked the question, who would you want managing your forested lands? You have some probably really great ideas. And that's something to kind of keep in mind. There's a lot of fear of community forestry because it comes with logging. But if you try to look past that to what's happening now, who's making decisions, and what connection do they have to the place that they're in, I believe that you'll see community forestry is a really great potential solution and opportunity. So in our organizational chart, the District of Sechelt appoints our board of directors. They operate at an arm's length relationship. So they don't provide direction to our board of directors. We have a community advisory panel that reports directly to our board. So if they make recommendations that are accepted by our board, then staff has to implement them. So they're not reporting directly to staff where we're having a lot of discretion in what kind of feedback we'll consider and what kind of feedback we won't consider. We're accountable to our board, and they have a great deal of respect and care for the time that the advisory panel puts in, and give very thoughtful consideration and have acted on several of their recommendations that have transformed our organization in the last few years. So where is the Sunshine Coast Community Forest? I'll let Lauren take over.
So thank you, everyone. This is so our Sunshine Coast Community Forest is really in 3 parcels in and around around Sechelt. We have I'm just gonna get a little laser light thing here. Where's that one located? Oh, sorry. trying to find some. Anyway, well, I'll just keep on moving on. So we have our Half Moon Bay areas. We have areas of watersheds, and so our community forest is actually 20 years old now. And when the community forest was awarded to the District of Sechelt, we had very succinct concerns around protection of watersheds and being able to control and decide what goes on in those watersheds. And one of those watersheds is Chapman Creek. And given that, we've had periods of drought and stage 4 emergency declarations for water, it's so very important that we ensure that, our community forest, our Chapman Creek watershed is intact. And so we have, as a kind of a local decision, and that's something that we follow, we have a moratorium on no harvesting within the Chapman Creek watershed. It was a 25-year moratorium, which we reaffirmed again in 2011. So and what that looks like in the future for further management is yet to be seen. That is a very community-led decision, and we don't take those lightly in how we look at those managements. So we have Chapman Creek watershed in this area. We have Gray Creek watershed in that area as well that supplies water to a local community, the Sandy Hook and Tawana community, as well in behind the airport in red here is a smaller area, which we call Wilson Creek. So just kind of give you, it's about 10,800 hectares of forest, and we operate on approximately 60% of that. So I can go into a little bit of what that kind of looks like. Oh, we gotta go and put that. There we go. All right. So in 2021, let's just back it up a little bit. When we first started form the community forest, no one knew kind of how a community forest could be run. In over time, we've seen an evolution of forest management in BC, as well as for old growth recruitment, old growth protection, plant communities, sensitive ecosystems, and a myriad of issues important to the community. In 2021, we introduced ecosystem-based management, and through the good work of Lori Kremsetter, who's was on the Provincial Forest Advisory Committee, helped us put together an ecosystem-based model that encapsulates a lot of the protecting ecosystems, vulnerable ecosystems, rare and endangered species, and encapsulating that. And that really is driving sort of a three-legged stool, both from the biological and then as well as the economic and social. And this is the Venn diagram to show that, in the middle is where we want to be managing for that sustainability. So we are one of the few people, I think, Whistler Community Forest, Cheakamus Community Forest, owned by the resort from Whistler. We've introduced a conservation network, so we protected 30% of our forests in each ecosystem, and for biodiversity, riparian management, and in and around areas of lakes, wetlands, and really focusing on climate adaptation, and just ensuring that wetlands remain wetlands, and water being an important value of our community that we want to protect. So a lot of the design principles, again, was wildlife habitat, old forest conservation, and then ecosystem representation over the whole community forest. So just wanted to give you kind of some examples. I know it's a little bit in the weeds a little bit, but just kind of like describing, what good biodiversity looks like. And then just kind of like how we go in there and we do the assessments. And these are the areas that we protect as recognizing that these could be future old growth recruitment. So in a lot of our community is probably with Bowen Island as well. We have very little old growth, but we have very good emerging forests that could be a future old growth. And so our philosophy is that if you don't set it aside today, then it won't become old growth in the future. So, and that's, sorry, I'm just backing up here.
I thought I'd taken it both transitions.
There's, we're not getting the port biodiversity one, but typical port biodiversity are kind of our younger forest, unfortunately. And it's a very simple canopy, sparse understory and vegetation, and areas that have been impacted by, old fires, or have been impacted by mostly like historic logging and human use. Is that because?
I don't know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not able to get some of the pictures, which shows 1,000 words.
Maybe if we do it like this. At least they can see.
Yeah. Oh. I apologize.
Okay.
Is everybody able to see our presentation at the moment?
Yeah.
In this raw? Okay, so vulnerable ecosystems, we talked a little bit about. So with growing concerns of drought and climate adaptation, we've integrated areas where we've looked at wetlands and wetlands, and we have very little wetlands in our area. So we use our proceeds from our harvesting to build wetlands, to go in there and look for opportunities where we bring in an excavator and have developed wetlands. And we actually work a lot with citizen groups. Sunshine Coast Wildlife Project is Michelle Leveland and Dave Stiles. And so they'll go out and they'll find these opportunities where they can, we would be able to establish, future wetlands. So like for amphibians and like frogs, as well as newts and salamanders. Also, those get used by, there was herons being used, using the wetlands as well, and sort of ancillary elk and whatnot, like to go and wade into these pools, as well as the sort of the areas that are very dry, and these are the areas that are like highly diverse species within them, the lichens, the warts, and mosses, but they're also really susceptible to our drought conditions. And so you may, on Vancouver Island, are starting to see, areas where you're getting cedar dying on the rocks, or ecosystems are getting very stressed. And so those are the ecosystems that we're looking at protecting. So kind of like what it looks like in practice is that, the community forest does do harvesting, and the benefits go back, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But in forestry itself, we identify a lot of areas where, like we have old forest protection, and we integrate this into our harvesting. And then within our harvesting cut blocks, we have single trees, we have groups of trees that provide platforms and perches and bat roosting and other things like that would be used for different species. And but we're also protecting, riparian protection where there is riparian values, old forest protection. We want to make sure that we have verbose protections around having interior-like conditions. And so this is an example of one of our sort of blocks. And I'm just gonna, I just wanted to, so that's kind of like talking a little bit about how our ecosystem-based management works, but maybe Sarah could talk a little bit about what we were doing with the benefits.
Sure. So for the first 15, 16 or so years of our community forest, we were not practicing ecosystem-based management. And I wasn't involved with the community forest at that time, but I do think that the change in the community forest happened in step with the change in the community. And I believe that most people who lived here were happy with the community forest operating previously as they were, delivering significant financial benefits to the community. So we had established a legacy fund, and from that fund, grants were made to community groups, a kind of average of around $125,000 per year. The community forest in its time has contributed $3.8 million to that fund, and almost $2 million remains in that fund. And so when we adopted ecosystem-based management, our board made the decision as an interim measure to reduce our harvesting level. So we haven't done a comprehensive analysis and modeling of what ecosystem-based management looks like on our harvest levels, but we know that it will have some impact. And so an estimate was made based on a kind of desktop analysis. And our board made a motion to direct us, even though our agreement with the province, our plan with the province says our harvest level is 20,000 cubic meters per year, our board directed us to manage to 15. And that's what we've done. And at the same time, our board provided notice to our shareholder that manages this fund with us that will no longer be contributing to it, and asking that the remaining almost $2 million be made into an endowment to continue providing those community grants. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we've all seen undeniable and marked impact on our lives on a regular basis because of climate change impacts. And so the community forest had to change with the community. The modeling process to actually dial in what that sustainable harvest level will now be is something we're doing now. It's quite costly. And so we were working to a level of planning to inform that, so that basically do it once and do it right. And so I think that this is a real example. People have a perception of community forests that, you know, there's a harvest target. It's a trick to get you to log in areas that are important to you. And I don't know at some point if that has been the case, but that has never felt like the case to me. Working for this community forest for 7 years, I think that it would be really difficult for the province to demand a community log more in their community forest when they had made a rational decision to log less in order to manage for their community values. There are a lot of benefits that forests offer us beyond these financial benefits. And at this point in time, you know, our community, led by our board of directors, is focusing on that, reinvesting in our community forest. Sorry. So this problem with the slide is actually because I have needed to upgrade my computer for a while, and I'm not willing to
We have some great pictures.
pay the new technology prices. But
It'll come back slowly.
you know, we have recreation in our community forest that's not managed as well as it could be. We've been doing wildfire risk reduction work driven by planning. And I think, you know, the real kind of goal isn't to make as much money as possible or to work to an amount of timber harvesting that's written somewhere that's right. It's to plan around the objectives that your community has and the values of your community. And, you know, there is some amount of harvesting that is sustainable. And we should be proud to contribute to BC's timber economy. It does create local jobs. Our community forest started with approximately $200,000 of seed money from the District of Sechelt. And in 20 years, we've generated $36 million in local economic activity. And I think you'd be really hard pressed to find an example of an economic development organization that can achieve those kinds of returns, provided that the resource is managed sustainably. And that's really the key. Who is deciding what is sustainable? And so what's really important in a community forest is who's managing it and what connection do they have to the place. Warren and I live here. We get our drinking water from the Chapman Creek Community Watershed. And I'm sure, you know, our drought emergency a few years ago made, you know, CBC News. It was what had happened was, in addition to the prolonged summer drought that we're all experiencing on the coast, when the precipitation did finally come, it was so late in the season that at the elevation of the lake that is our drinking water reservoir, it fell as snow and it didn't replenish the lake. And they were actually looking at trucking in water. We have, you know, 30,000 residents here. The bill for that kind of thing is, you know, it's just insane to fathom. And so having that perspective when we talk about, at some point, if we're going to be active in the Chapman community watershed, we know, and hopefully we've built enough trust with our community that they'll know that it won't be for timber objectives. And we don't know what those objectives might be. It may be that right now wildfire risk reduction isn't a reason for you to get a community forest. It might be that drinking water isn't, or maybe it is. But I think it's important to have those areas that impact our communities under local management in a way that is dynamic. Our community drinking reservoir at Chapman Lake is in a Class A provincial park. And we're looking at massive, in the hundreds of millions of dollars for reservoir infrastructure because we're not able to make the dam higher in order to to increase the size of that reservoir because it's in a park. If it weren't in a park, we could do that. And it might be that that's not the right solution, but we're not able to consider it because that decision is now out of our hands. It's made by the province. And so our community is having to struggle, to manage this balance that might look different now than it did 20 years ago when it was put in a park. And so community forests really allow for this kind of dynamic management. Right now, what we have in Conservation Network, the future of our community might want to do something different with it, but we have to trust that the people that live in the place will make the right decisions, and community forests are really what enables that. So it's not so much about coming up with what the objectives are going to be and what you're going to do with it exactly. It's who can be entrusted to do that. And at the very least, it should be people who live there. So I think that's all we have. I would just say that we do have a website with a lot of information, including our new strategic plan, a couple of videos of ourselves and other community forests that have been made in the last year, and pretty large document repository. So if you have any more interest in the kind of technical side of ecosystem-based management, you'll find most of those resources there. And if you don't find something you're looking for, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the detail and the images. I'll look to council for questions or comments of our delegation here. Councillor Wake.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. We've been talking a lot about all these issues for a couple of years now and wondering how we could initiate, and now I understand what the problem is. There's a lot of push and pull and give and take that has to happen. But your experience is really encouraging, and so I hope it helps us move forward.
We're in an unprecedented time right now. The Minister of Forest has a mandate to expand the community forest. So there's a lot of communities that want a community forest, and there's a lot of communities that have a community forest that want to expand. And our community forest is looking at doing expansion on the Sunshine Coast in different areas, and the uptake, or at least the thoughts are from different municipalities that they're very interested in joining us, whereas 20 years ago they walked away from the table. So I think we've come a long way to demonstrate what a community forest can do for the community, and there's there's now 60 community forests, or 62 community forests here in British Columbia. BC Community Forest Association, a very mature group, has a lot of resources to help you define what that looks like. And really it's about, working with the community to help define what your community forest could look like initially. Like we've had examples of Harrop Proctor. They started off, they were one of the ground zero areas for civil disobedience for like blowing up trucks and other things, nefarious things like that, stopping logging. And they went from having 2,500 to an increase. I can't remember what their new AAC are, but half of their revenues are generated by a sawmill. So they started up their own sawmill. They mill wood from the community forest for their community, and able to now sell that product outside their community for them to, and the principal driver isn't the logging anymore. It's about the mill and providing all those jobs, secured sustainable jobs for them. So there's some really good examples out there that kind of shows partnerships with First Nations, and everyone kind of working together and really, our vision in the future is to have the community talk about, community saying this is our community forest, and seeing the benefits from it, and rather than a top-down approach. I think it's really becoming like a bottoms up type of community here on the Sunshine Coast. So
Thank you.
spirit.
Thank you for that. Councillor Getty.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. It seems to me that you need to start with some sort of a very detailed inventory. So when you talk about where the wetlands are and where the old growth is, and wildlife corridors and all of those, maybe future old growth forests and all of those kinds of, and I suppose where the timber is that is marketable, that has some sort of access. So did you start with that detailed inventory? And if so, did you get help in terms of all of the information and the detail and the expertise to get a proper inventory?
So when we first started, really no one knew what a kind of community forest was about. And they used the provincial database, which, has a lot of, it's a course inventory. And when they ran the AAC, they were saying, oh, we can support 50,000 cubic meters a year. And then they said, well, we're going to lower it down to 20,000. And so it really had no basis on what we'd be able to harvest, based on concerns with the community. Over time, we've had LIDAR, which is, I'm sure everyone there knows what a LIDAR is. But we've had terrestrial ecosystem mapping. We've had wildlife surveys, and we're still discovering. Like just last week, we had biologists that went out to do goshawk surveys. We had biologists, and they were looking for goshawks, screech owls, rare and endangered species, and things like that. So we're always trying to supplement our knowledge, and in being able to incorporate that into future planning. And then that ability for us to, we are able now to go to the Forest Service, do verbose, really detailed planning and detailed analysis to be able to say, okay, in these areas here, we're going to manage for recreation. In these areas here, we're going to manage and do kind of like we call it a 3-zone concept. Conservation, integrated forest management, and maybe special management in and around, say, recreation areas, or in and around people's houses for wildfire risk reductions. And we're the first community forest, or we're first actually licensee in the Sunshine Coast District to get specific wildfire risk reduction standards for reforestation. So, it's a journey, and it's consistently changing all the time. So, we're being open to kind of like reopen it right now and say, hey, this is what our community wants today, and it may not be the same as what our community wants and needs are tomorrow. So we understand that, and that's why we will have to revise our planning every, say, 10 years or so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this and for your presentation and for giving us some of your time this afternoon. I'm not seeing any further questions or comments, so we'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
We are now looking at section 5 of our agenda, staff reports 5.1, consideration of a community forest on Bowen Island. We have Carla Scoos, our manager of environment and parks planning, with us today.
Hey, thanks very much. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Through the chair, got a short presentation for you. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is the Squamish Nation Land Use Planning Agreement. Since it was brought up at the last council meeting, I've added this slide. It's additional to what was included in the agenda. I touched on this on my report a little bit, but I thought it would be a good thing to highlight given the recent developments. Council's strategic plan included the strategic initiative of a forest landscape planning with the action to explore options for a forest landscape plan or community forest model to expand stewardship over provincial public land blocks. Squamish Nation Land Use Planning Agreement is an agreement between the province and the Squamish Nation, and it's broader than a forest landscape plan in that it includes objectives apart from forestry, like land use zoning and protected areas, but similar in that it's a landscape level plan and that it will guide forest stewardship and site level planning for forestry operations. So if BIM were to continue with exploring a community forest, we wouldn't prepare a forest landscape plan, but we would use this plan to guide our forest stewardship plan. So this agreement is open for comment until July 20th, 2026. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see there's a map there which shows a cutout of the Squamish Nation territory. And then so Bowen Island is included in that. And it also shows the different blocks of land, which are organized into 4 different colors, and those identify the areas that are proposed to be protected within that agreement. And of the new protected areas, there's no special cultural management areas identified on Bowen Island. So for that reason, staff will be coming back to council at the next meeting to recommend that we don't submit any feedback for this. Bye. So I've also prepared a potential harvest scenario for Bowen Island so that we might get an idea of what a community forest could potentially look like on the island. So keeping in mind that this includes lots of assumptions and it's really just for illustrative purposes, but we learned lots about community forests during the delegation, and this, just puts it into context for the island here. So this scenario is based off the Squamish Community Forest, which is in the same bioclimatic zone and could be expected to have somewhat similar timber supply. While also just acknowledging that there's many variables that haven't been accounted for in this. So the Squamish Community Forest is a total of 11,000 hectares. And then unprotected crown lands on Bowen Island are about 1,450 hectares. So for Squamish, they identified around 7,000 hectares of no harvest areas. And so those include old growth management areas, steep slopes, deciduous areas that have more deciduous species which don't have any commercial value, and wildlife habitat areas. And so assuming that for Bowen Island, we would have similar conditions and similar values, and using just a simple ratio, we identified that it could be 915 hectares for a no harvest area, leaving 535 hectares for a timber harvesting land base. So using an annual allowable cut of 2,500 cubic meters per year and a density of 500 cubic meters per hectare, there's a potential of 5 hectares of forest that would be cleared annually. So again, for context, 1 hectare is, I just wanted to show this on a map that everyone could recognize, but so what I have highlighted there is the area that was cleared for the community center is about equal to 1 hectare. So it would be about 5 times that for a community forest operation. And so that might seem kind of large, but then when you look at it in terms of relative to the entire area of Mount Gardner, for example, or for all unprotected crown land on the island, the area doesn't seem as large. It represents less than 1% of the lands on Mount Gardner alone. Actually, it's 0.6%. And so, I mean, that would be for like a clear cut, for example. There are definitely other ways to run forestry operations, but there's always trade-offs, and, you know, selective logging may leave more trees for regeneration, but those are susceptible to wind throw. And then you'd have to kind of get into a much larger area to get the same amount of timber out of it. And so, and you'd have to build more roads, which is arguably the most destructive part of forestry. So there's, yeah, lots of trade-offs. So based on the average raw log prices, the gross that I calculated was 320,000 per year. So that doesn't include any of the upfront costs. So preparing a management plan, for example, took the Squamish Community Forest 5 years. So it's obviously a very involved and probably expensive process. Road building on steep terrain can also be really expensive and challenging. And operational costs will be high. We don't have a lot of people already doing logging on the island. We have to think about transporting everything off of the ferry, and probably transporting workers here to do and equipment to do these operations. But obviously, after a number of years, our profits are likely to increase after we have all these things in place. But what staff kind of gathered is that the limiting factor is likely to be public support. We have to have public support to start a community forest. And given our history and the island's history of opposing logging, what staff is kind of assuming that will be the limiting factor. And there's also, given all these other challenges of running a forest operation, and that the limited supply of timber on the island makes it unattractive for forestry operations. I think that the recommendation was that the committee of the whole receive this report for information. But if an alternative was sought, if one of the alternatives was preferred by council, staff would ask for maybe some direction on what the objectives are of a community forest. And you know, yeah, we'd look for direction. I think a little bit on, you know, what crown lands are being contemplated and what are the objectives, so that potentially we can also look at other tenure options that, you know, if it's stewardship is really the main objective here, there may be other better options for tenure, maybe not. The province didn't seem very keen on letting us conserve all the land without really clear and compelling arguments for that. But yeah, if we had some, more direction on what the objectives were, we could probably present better options for council. I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the manager. I'll look to council for questions or comments. Councillor Morse.
I recall the province has, and I sent you the information this morning, or just now, a viewscapes policy. And so when you're diving up the sea to sky from a tourism perspective, they want people not to see clear flashes of logging, but nice trees and nice viewscapes. And the same when you're out in the water on the ferries and stuff like that. And I do recall people talking about not wanting trees cut near the water in front of people's houses so that we wouldn't have to look at houses when they're out on the water. And then I ran through the draft OCP, and there's really no policies in that draft OCP that really support a community forest. And there was a policy in the 2010 OCP Objective 91 that has not been carried forward. And that would be the only policy that was really supporting a community forest. So out of curiosity, and I didn't have time to go back and look, how big was the clear cut that was done for the radar tower? Can you remember?
My apologies, I don't recall.
Because that is very visible when you're coming around the highway and the turn to the ferries. I forgot to get a friend of mine to send me a picture. So, and again, all the community backlash that we had with the timber license. So I don't know if it's something we would definitely have to put new policies in the draft OCP to accommodate it. And whether it's something we really want to do.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Fast?
Thank you. Yeah, I have I had a similar question, if that was a question. Did you consider the high visual sensitivity factor of clear cuts or other kinds of logging on Bowen?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I don't think we're there yet. We tried to provide just a high level overview of what a community forest might look like on Bowen Island. And I feel like that has been addressed in certain landscape level plans. So I think that's, you know, I've seen like forest landscape plans that have dealt with that. Many of them are quite old at this point. I haven't seen anything recently about it, but I believe maybe you sent them to me.
Yes, I did.
But I think they were, you know, from upwards of 30 years ago. And so I don't know that that's as much of a priority at this point for the province, but I know that they do exist and could be used in planning moving forward. It's just not something that I've been able to delve into at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, it's from 1992 was the last time. They called it Chilliwack Forest District Recreation Inventory Update, and it showed high visual sensitivity for all of Bowen Island. I don't know of anything more recent for Bowen, except that I did find the big spatial planning layers. They're on acetate, so we're getting them digitized, hopefully. And when and if I see them, I'll send them your way. But doing that visual sensitivity changes usually implies you get neighboring communities to comment. And I remember here being part of Bowen Council a few years ago, we were referred something from I think it was Langdale area about did we have any comment about their plans, the plans to do some logging there. So anyway, there's more factors behind it, and I take your point about you're just looking at the big broad scale idea. Personally, I thought that was useful, and I'll be looking more at your slides in terms of the scale and the amount of work that would be required to get there. And if anybody's interested, I did look at my notes as well from Islands Trust. We had a delegation of senior foresters from the province, and I'll send you the link later, January 19th, 2023, if anybody wants to look it up, to Trust Council. There were questions. I would be interested in, at some point, considering the biodiversity and the ways that we can keep our forests healthier in a time of climate change for all the ecosystem services and the recreation values and all those things. But personally, I'm not interested in logging, and I can't. And I think we should receive this report for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fest. I'm curious because I've haven't dug too far into community forest, but I've done a bit of a survey of what's around the province, and it seems like different communities with community forests seem to use them in different ways. And also the historical context seems to have been to expand the community forest model from just a straight harvesting and logging model into other objectives as well. So I'm curious just about, and the focus here was on, up to 5 hectares on Bowen could be logged per year, or is allowable. One, is that something that's mandatory to do? Do we have to harvest any of it under a community forest model? Given that I would agree Bowen's positioning, we're not like the Slocan Valley or Northern BC where forestry is a major industry. So is there what am I asking here? Are there enough tools under the community forest model that something Bowen specific and useful to Bowen could be made to work here? That doesn't, necessarily have a focus on 5 hectares of logs a year.
So thank you for that question. I think that when we've begun exploring this, and when even like members of council and the public have been exploring it and asking about it, they've asked the same question. Is it possible that this looks more like a stewardship model than a forestry model? But I think the one thing that's really important to understand is that the community forest agreement is a timber tenure. Then the way that we make money is through harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a park. It is harvesting is expected as part of the tenure. And it's part of an active management plan for multiple values. But yes, it would definitely involve harvesting.
Right. I'm aware of at least one community forest, though, that formed a community forest under the tenure and timber agreement and then just refused to harvest. Which led to some interesting pieces, and the province seemed to be fine with it as well, because there is some utility, I think, around wildfire management in particular, and as we have trees come down and fuel starts to stack up across those crown lands. If there ever was a fire, the utility of forest management for wildfire management is interesting. And then tangential to that, there was the mention of other tenure agreements that could be reached with the province. And I'm curious about those and how far staff has gone down into researching those, because if it's not being used for timber and it's not being used for anything else, like we have these giant crown land blocks that then sort of sit in limbo, that just sit as crown land. So I'm curious if there's any other available policy tools or tenure tools that could advance some discussion of crown land on the island and how that can have some community oversight over it.
Right. Thanks for that question. Staff has been trying really hard to explore other options with provincial staff and haven't really gotten much of anywhere. So I guess the really short answer is I don't know,
Right.
But the longer answer is that there are Land Act tenures for different purposes. There's community institutional, and those are for like public serving things like a public facility where like the province would give us a tenure for those purposes. There's also commercial tenures where if you were like charging on a per fee basis, because I did inquire about like all of the tourism based people on Mount Gardner that we get. And so if we were charging a fee for that, we could explore a commercial tenure. They can't be in direct competition with any existing businesses though.
Mhm.
We talked about, different conservation potential tenures for that. But I feel like I was pushed off a little bit about that and just saying that the ministry prioritizes files that align with, key government initiatives such as housing, connectivity, electrification, and public health and safety. And that any consideration of like broader protection or alternative management would have to align with broader provincial land and resource management objectives.
Mm.
So I think, you know, what they're trying to say is that like the province is interested in forestry and having forestry operations on its land, and they propose, you know, their annual allowable cuts assigned for crown lands in given areas, and that they wouldn't necessarily just say, yes, you can protect all of the land on Bowen Island. Like, I just don't think that that's going to happen. That's my sense. I do think though that there's potential for arguing that some land is definitely more valuable and worth protecting. I think we, you know, using the biodiversity plan that was completed by the Bowen Island Conservancy recently, that might give us you know, a tool that provides evidence that of the importance of these lands, and it might make a compelling case for their protection. There are conservation tools, but I haven't really quite determined how we can use them as of yet, or if we can use them.
Okay.
I was gonna comment just on the wildfire aspect as well, and something that I just heard this morning is that if we had a community forest tenure, that we would be responsible for fighting any wildfires that started. So there is that aspect as well. So we could manage some wildfire, like do some fuel management in Crown lands. But I will say that I think I touched on this in my report, but the community wildfire resiliency plan that was done did not recommend fuel treatments. So it's important to recognize that we have a much different forest than they do in the interior. And I think we've seen some examples of community forest management that manages for wildfire, like fuels, wildfire fuels. It wasn't identified as a priority here, except in 2 small areas. And we can already do that using the funding that we have through FireSmart. So whether that's something that we need to pursue might be, you know, would be up to council, I guess. But they, yeah, I wouldn't say that it's a priority. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wait, Councillor Fast, and Councillor Getty.
We received this letter from Chris Arnold Forster. Have you seen that letter? Yeah. And basically, that letter, I think, encapsulates what we've been discussing here. Is there's a lot of ways to go here, and but I think it's pretty clear that we would like to lean towards the less logging, more eco-based forest management. I'll just read his last paragraph. In conclusion, I would hope that further investigation of community forest management would be considered rather than discounted. Failing that, I suspect we'll be doomed to the management of Crown land by non-islanders or an increase in the tax burden of islanders. So, and then, you know, in the presentation, they also referred to or you mentioned the Squamish strategic planning. It took 5 years. So I guess my question, comment is, I think we need to get started on the process here, but this is going to have to involve more people than council and staff. We're going to have to call on the outside resources. So it feels like we need a strategic plan of investigating community forest management.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Fast, followed by Councillor Getty.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually, take a different approach. I don't think, forestry management is how we should be approaching, the crown lands, I should say the public lands, that are within, municipal boundaries. I think we should be looking at the values that we want to, get from them. Maybe we should look at a water sustainability plan first. Like, what do we really value the most in the time of a changing climate? With our 7 water districts, and then the other half of the people on Bowen, on their own wells. I think without a river and a snowpack, I think we need to think about water sustainability. And there is the province does have a way for communities to build a water sustainability plan. I think we need to think about why Bowen escaped the hemlock looper insect infestations, partly because of the biodiversity there. And every little, and taking a forestry approach could mean planting more evergreens, where right now we have deciduous trees, stands of alders and maple mixed in, and that all creates a more diverse forest that makes the risk of insect infestations and wildfires and all those things less likely. So I think we've got a pretty good ecologically sound forest right now. And having been part of the discussions from when BC Timber Sales was going to come and start logging, and seeing the community rise up and council at the time rise up, I think I don't see the benefit of taking a forestry kind of approach for Bowen Island, and having done all kinds of research in the past. Anyway, I would sooner look at a water sustainability plan, the biodiversity plan that we've got to use, and those kinds of things, because I don't see a strong threat from logging companies coming to Bowen. And I'm not sure what the problem is that we're trying to solve with the forestry management plan. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, and I'm open to looking at ecological health of our crown lands. I think we need them, but I'm not sure that logging, particularly industrial logging, is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Getty.
I was really glad to see your report on the agenda. I wasn't expecting it, and I was a little bit surprised. I was reminded in terms of what was part of our strategic plan, but I hadn't realized that you were working on it. And I think that this is a really good summation and start, and you've obviously done a whole lot more that isn't in the report to what you reported on today. I think there's a little problem with vocabulary in terms of a forestry management plan has a specific technical definition in the legislation in terms of industrial logging and, you know, what the allowable cut is and all of that. And I think that that is a little bit confusing to me and possibly others in terms of I want to be able to manage it. And I don't necessarily want the province to come in and say, you know, this is, we're losing so much other timber in other parts of the province, and this is good, solid, healthy wood and, you know, good size, and we want it kind of thing. And I don't want us to just drift into a situation where we don't have control over it. So I would like to see this continue somehow or other. I mean, I guess I imagine some sort of a forest master plan. We don't call it management, in terms of looking at all of the values that are important to us in this community. So the watershed, the views, the biodiversity, the you know, so everybody walks the trails, gentle recreation. We don't want motorized vehicles, but, you know, there's other issues that come up. And I think that if we can somehow figure out a way of examining this and coming up with, some ideas of what our priorities are, what our values are, then we're in a much better position if anybody else comes along and says that they've got a better idea, then we've got something to work from. So, while the forest management plan and the allowable yield and cut and all the rest of it is not something that we're eager to get involved with, I still think that we should continue with this and do the research and involve more people so that we come up with some sort of a plan. There's, you know, if the Squamish Nation has done their land use planning and it has, the broad, report that they've got has forestry included in it, and then they've also done the detailed cultural significance forestry areas that, I think there were 2 or 3 small dots on their map for Bowen Island. I haven't, for the cultural? Oh,
Not
I
for
thought there was.
forestry, they're
I thought
for
there was one
other.
in Stone Cove and someplace else. Anyway, it would be really, really good to have the us as Bowen Island to have the information so that if we get into discussions about land and crown land and leases and working with the Squamish Nation, that we've got some sort of an idea of where we want to start any kind of negotiations or talking with them. And I also think with the, if the province comes back and says that, you know, we should be part of the logging industry, then I think we need to be much better organized in terms of all of the arguments. So I'm thankful for this, and I would be wanting it to go further than just accepting it as information. So I'm not sure what or how or to do that, and I'm not sure what your work list is like, but you know, reading Chris Arnold Forster's shown up at 2 or 3 or more of my open houses over the years, and he's met with Councillor Wake and I and a couple of other people on occasion, and he's one person in the community who's very knowledgeable. And he's got, you know, he knows of a couple of other people and has all sorts of wonderful connections. So there are people in our community, like all of our big questions that come up. And, you know, I think that we could, if we've got the time and we've got some, we've definitely got interest, if we can get some people involved, that this could develop into something that would be very, very helpful. So thank you for this.
Councillor Wake.
I don't think we're disagreeing here. I mean, if I take into account Mayor Leonard's comments and Councillor Fast and Councillor Getty and my own, I don't want to see logging here. That's not what I'm suggesting. And forest management, I think I'm struggling with the term. Managing for what? You know, we don't want to manage for an annual allowable cut. We want to manage for the health of the forest, the biodiversity. And, you know, the logging approach provides an income, you know, a revenue to support it. There's got to be other routes, and it sounds like other communities, other community forests have achieved that. So I think we just have to figure out how to move forward.
Councillor Fast, who
I,
may disagree.
I have a question for you. Can you repeat where you heard about the community forest who was refusing to uphold their agreement?
I don't want to speak for them.
Okay.
I may consider inviting, doing some more
Okay.
research.
Thank you. I just thought I missed it. Then
Yeah.
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think in terms of what steps to do next, maybe we want to make a motion about that we're in agreement that we're most concerned about the ecological health of the forests and wetlands and ecosystems on Crown lands. And or we want to refer the idea of the protecting the ecological health of the Crown lands to the next council, because we're not going to be revisiting the strategic plan again, as far as I know, but we may want to write a letter to the next council or give them some suggestions. And I think we might, with the biodiversity plan and mapping tools that we've recently acquired, and some of the old maps, which are, it may be from 1992, but this is the visual sensitivity mapping that relies on slopes and aspects and what can you see from where. And that doesn't change over time, although there may be clearings and more places to see things. And the tourism industry has changed and things like that. I don't think it would be less interesting. Anyway, we do have a number of tools, and we've got our watersheds to think of. I think that there's some work underway by staff in terms of island-wide water planning. And I don't know if we want to, at this point, do more. My approach would be to move the recommendation that the staff have recommended here when you're ready, Chair.
Ms. Morse?
Just a couple other things. The Squamish Nation Community Forest is a partnership with the District of Squamish and the Squamish Nation. And I would suspect that the Squamish Nation, if we did do a community forest, would want the same thing here. And we had any discussions with the Squamish Nation?
Through the chair, no, we haven't contacted them about this.
Yeah, and their land use plan just identifies that there's no cultural sensitivities in the forest areas on our island, and that's what they've identified in the other ones. And then I think, looking through the objectives that we've got in the draft objectives and principles in the OCP, we're wanting to have input and say and, keep things sort of, not logging necessarily, but some control over what happens. So, and I dug out an old file, but I didn't look at the document. There was a correspondence going back a number of years ago with the forestry branch about how we could have some input into and control over what happened, but I don't know if that's still a possibility or not. I gave Carla the file this morning. And I'm looking at objective number 2, or alternative number 2 in Carla's report, that the committee of the whole direct staff to continue investigating tenure opportunities for stewardship of Crown land. I would delete the word tenure and just look at and have a motion that said that the committee of the whole direct staff to continue investigating opportunities for Bowen's stewardship of the Crown lands. And that way we can figure out how we can, because we don't want it to happen willy-nilly without any control of ourselves.
Mhm.
But I don't think, given what went on the last time, that a community forest with logging is going to meet. But I do remember discussions in years past where there's some nice maple or some of those, for furniture makers and people like that to be able to access some of the timber. But I don't know if that was even be possible with the way the province works right now. I noticed in the Seashell one they had, or one of them, there was, they let people go in and cut their firewood in the community forest. So that's my suggestion for what we would do at this point.
Okay, so I've heard suggestions for motions, but no motions. Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the idea of wanting to keep control, but I also heard harvesting coming from that mention of the second objective. So I'd like to move. Unless somebody brings the ecological health of the forest into it, the recommendation as written that the committee of the whole receive the report entitled Consideration of a Community Forest on Bowen Island for information.
Moved by Councillor Fast.
Can I speak to my motion?
Once it's seconded.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor Wake.
Just that, as others have pointed out, we're in the middle of the official community plan process. And we've got the biodiversity plan in the current draft that the Bowen Island Conservancy's put in there. And we've got all kinds of public input coming through the OCP process. And I kind of think that now is not the time to go forward with asking staff to do more work on this kind of topic until we've got the OCP process completed in front of us. And then, so that's why I move that we receive it for information at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion? Councillor Morris.
Looking at it from the, we're just finishing public comments on the OCP. There is nothing in the draft OCP that would permit a community forest.
There is a policy around managed forest in the OCP.
But that's not okay, I'll go back and look at it again because I didn't read it that way. That it was allowing a managed forest isn't necessarily a community forest in my mind.
But that's for the OCP, which will come back to us.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, if you're wanting to, do we either just rule out the community forest now, so it's clear that the objectives are matching the objectives of council, and if we want to be able to continue looking at community forest, then somebody's going to have to suggest something else to go in the OCP.
Okay. Yeah, from my end, I don't see the second, so I won't vote in favor just to receive. I think the discussion of stewardship of the Crown lands does need to continue. It does deserve some staff time. I would concur with Councillor Wake that I don't think we're in disagreement based on the conversations that I've heard and had in that the ultimate goal of any stewardship of Crown land opportunity on Bowen Island is for stewardship of the ecological health itself. I mean, I've said it before in open meeting that I really pity anyone that comes to Bowen and tries to suggest that they're going to pull logs out of Crown land, because they would meet some very fierce opposition to that. But at the same time, I do think that those lands are sitting there, and there does need to be time, effort, and energy spent with the province, with the Squamish Nation, with other stakeholders in figuring out what is it are we going to do with them. So for me, the motion to receive falls a little short, as it effectively cuts off discussion until the next council term, and I would prefer to see a modified alternative too, that the committee of the whole direct staff to continue investigating opportunities for stewardship of Crown lands. I'm not seeing any further discussion on the motion to receive. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye. Oh, sorry. No.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. So that motion does not carry, with Councillor Fast in support. And I'll move one of the alternatives, that the committee of the whole direct staff to continue investigating opportunities for stewardship of Crown lands.
Second.
Moved, seconded. I think I already spoke to it in my last comments. I see Councillor Fast with her hand up.
No, withdrawn. It's okay.
Not seeing any further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
I,
And that carries unanimously. Thank you to our manager. Moving on to item 6, adjournment. Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wick. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
I.
Aye, and we are adjourned.
Ooh.